Race for the White House. Voters in New Hampshire are headed to the polls in the second contest of the 2020 campaign. We examined the role life issues are playing among Democratic candidates. Born Alive bill. Lawmakers try again to pass a measure to protect babies who survive an abortion. We're on Capitol Hill. Supporting the Vatican. Carl Anderson, Supreme Knight of the Knights of Columbus, tells us about the work the organization does in Rome. And United Through Worship, why the head of the Archdiocese of New York is in Cuba. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, February 11th, 2020. Good evening and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. The votes are being counted in New Hampshire. Presidential candidates wait to hear who will come out on top in the state's Democratic primary election. But former Vice President Joe Biden is already looking ahead to other races. Meanwhile, President Donald Trump claims the most support in New Hampshire is going to him. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Mark.
Tracy, President Trump predicts he'll have a landslide victory in New Hampshire this November, but the focus now is on the Democrats' primary race. After uncertainty filled the air at the Iowa caucuses, candidates hope for a clearer picture to come out of New Hampshire tonight.
In New Hampshire, many of the votes are in. The polling stations visited by candidates. Former South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg greeted by supporters early this morning. He claimed recent victory in the Iowa caucuses, but after technical difficulties cast doubt on the total vote count, so did Senator Bernie Sanders.
Our campaign is off to a great start.
The candidates hope clearer results will come out of New Hampshire tonight.
I'm in this fight, and I plan to win it.
But former Vice President Joe Biden, who only said he was mildly hopeful about his chances in New Hampshire, already left for the next state.
We're going to head to South Carolina tonight, then we're going to go to Nevada. As I've said from the beginning, we got to look at them all.
Making his own visit to New Hampshire last night, President Trump predicted results in the general election.
With your help on November 3rd, we are going to defeat the radical socialist Democrats. We are going to win New Hampshire in a landslide.
He also criticized his opponents for supporting abortion. All Democratic candidates do, though some have provided nuanced answers when discussing it. Over the weekend, Andrew Yang said no one should be celebrating abortion.
It's a tragedy to me if someone decides that they don't want to have a child. I think that celebrating children, family, these are universal human values.
And Senator Amy Klobuchar reportedly said she's in favor of trying to find common ground to bring down the number of abortions. She cited her work to promote adoption, but she also supports funding Planned Parenthood, the nation's largest abortion provider. Tracy.
Okay, thank you, Mark. White House correspondent Mark Irons, thanks again. And joining us now via Skype to discuss the Democratic presidential candidates and their stance on abortion is Robert George, McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence at Princeton University. Robert, welcome back to the show.
My pleasure, Tracy. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we just heard from Mark Irons, our White House correspondent, that Senator Amy Klobuchar appears to be willing to work with pro-lifers. What did you make of her remarks, and how do you think they'll play with voters?
Well, I'm afraid that the most we can say on behalf of Amy Klobuchar is she's not quite as bad as almost all of her competitors for the Democratic nomination are when it comes to the sanctity of human life and the protection of unborn babies. Unfortunately, Senator Klobuchar favors Planned Parenthood funding of abortion, permission of abortion, even in the third trimester. So she's got quite a radical, quite extreme record on abortion. But unlike some of her competitors, Senator Sanders, Mayor Buttigieg, she is willing to work with pro-lifers to promote adoption. She at least seems willing to recognize that abortion is not a good thing, that it should be avoided where it can be. There should be alternatives to abortion, such as adoption. So we'll take what we can, but gosh, it's a shame that the Democratic Party is so extreme that even a position like Klobuchar's counts as some movement in the moderate direction.
I know over the weekend on Twitter you pointed to video remarks by Senator Bernie Sanders and, quote, he wrote, quote, "Here's Bernie Sanders officially excommunicating pro-life Democrats." Why did you write that, and what kind of feedback did you receive, if any?
Well, there, Senator Sanders was at a forum being held by pro-abortion groups, and he was asked by the moderator of the forum, a pro-abortion woman, is it possible to be pro-life and a Democrat? There was a time when there were many, many pro-life Democrats. I began my career as a Democrat, a pro-life Democrat. But gradually over time, there's been less and less room, and now we're down to virtually no room for pro-life Democrats. And Senator Sanders, and here I'll at least congratulate him for his candor, was very blunt and said that it is essential to be pro-choice, as he puts it, to be a Democrat. In other words, there is no room for pro-life people in the Democratic Party. You are not wanted here. You are not acceptable here. You're an intruder. He virtually said, get out of my party. If you're pro-life, you cannot be a Democrat.
How big do you think the fight for the unborn is becoming in the 2020 election?
I think it's going to be a very important issue. I think it's going to be a very important issue indeed, because the radicalism of the Democrats are now unable even to say that they would protect the baby who survives an abortion and is born alive. That kind of radicalism is going to have electoral consequences. There are many staunch pro-life Americans who think that we should never sanction elective abortion. There are others who are sort of in the middle, and they think that abortion as a tragic necessity, a necessary evil, perhaps should be permitted in the first trimester, but not further, or maybe even less than that, in the first 10 weeks, but not further. But there are not a lot of Americans. Only a small percentage, maybe 13, 15% at most of Americans, think that third trimester abortion should be permitted, or a fortiori abortion after birth when a child survives an abortion. But that extreme position is where all of the Democrats, except I believe Tulsi Gabbard, finds himself or herself. Tulsi Gabbard's position is only slightly less extreme. She would permit some regulation of abortion in the third trimester, but she still wants it to be legal all the way through 24 weeks. But that makes her a moderate by these Democratic standards. I can't help but think that the Democrats are going to pay a heavy price for this kind of extremism, especially when it comes to something as critical as the sanctity of human life in November.
All right, well, Robert, thank you so much for your insight. We really appreciate it. Robert George, McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence at Princeton University. Thanks again.
Thank you, Tracy.
This morning, the Senate Judiciary Committee held a hearing aimed at protecting the lives of babies who have survived an attempted abortion. Witnesses for and against the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act testified. Catholic News Agency's Matt Hadra reports now from Capitol Hill.
Good evening, Tracy. The Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act seeks to legally protect babies who survive an abortion attempt. Democrats last year successfully blocked the bill from going into effect. Today's hearing is an attempt by the Republican-led committee to resurrect the bill. Former registered nurse Jill Stanek of the Susan B. Anthony list testified about holding a baby in a Chicago hospital in 1999 after he survived his abortion for the last 45 minutes of his life. She called it a life-changing moment.
I couldn't let this baby die alone, and so I cradled and rocked him.
Republican Senator John Cornyn of Texas questioned the CEO of the National Women's Law Center, pressing her on why she supports letting a baby die once it's been born alive.
These are babies that are already dying. And the question is, in those last moments, who is making the determination about how those last moments are going to be spent?
So you think all of these children born alive after a botched abortion are going to die anyway?
Again, I really reject the framework of the question.
Democratic Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois says infanticide is already illegal.
I don't believe what's being done with this law adds anything to that. I think it complicates the situation.
Last year, Democratic Senator Tim Kaine wrote in a letter, the bill's sponsors forced a quick vote on this legislation rather than holding hearings, where they would have to publicly answer questions about the legislation. He continued, I oppose infanticide and support the current federal law that protects all babies from the moment of birth. Our point of disagreement is not over the treatment of babies, but about whether existing law already accomplishes our shared goal. Republican Josh Hawley of Missouri counters.
Half the states, don't have rules that say no. You've got to give children who are born alive the same care, even if they're part of abortion.
Senator Tim Kaine said that we need to hold a hearing. You're trying to push this legislation through, so we're giving them the hearing that they asked for. So this is.
Last year, 53 senators voted in favor of the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act, including 3 Democrats, Senators Manchin, Jones, and Casey. We'll see if enough Democrats support the bill this year, an election year, for it to pass. At the Capitol, Matt Hadro, EWTN News Nightly.
People in Iran are marking the anniversary of the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Participants gathered in Tehran and burned an American flag. President Hassan Rouhani encouraged attendees to vote in upcoming parliamentary elections. Officials view high voter turnout as a sign of confidence in the country's Shiite theocracy. But there is anger over Iran's faltering economy, which has been hit hard by sanctions from the Trump administration. Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido says that he is returning to the country.
Venezolanas y venezolanos, tenemos el respaldo y el respeto del mundo.
Guaido says that he is ready to lead rallies against the socialist government of President Nicolas Maduro. Guaido left the country last month. He visited a number of North American and European capitals and attended the State of the Union address in Washington, D.C. At least 15 Rohingya refugees died in the Bay of Bengal when their overcrowded wooden boat capsized. The Coast Guard, Navy divers, and other rescuers saved at least 70 other people from the boat. It's unclear how many remain missing. The refugees were staying at a camp in Bangladesh after they were forced to flee their homes in Myanmar following a harsh military crackdown. Nearly 70 African migrants who went missing while trying to reach Europe by boat have been located. Officials say the boat was found by a merchant ship off the coast of the Spanish port of Malaga. This latest rescue comes just a day after 119 migrants were discovered on board two smuggling boats near the Strait of Gibraltar. The head of the German Bishops' Conference says that he will step down at the end of his term next month. Cardinal Reinhard Marx says that he is not seeking a second term because of his age, and he wants to spend more time in his role as the Archbishop of Munich and Freising. The 66-year-old says that he supports discussions in Germany over the role of women in the church and how Catholics will address the clergy sexual abuse crisis. The Knights of Columbus celebrate 100 years of their permanent residence in Rome. The Knights' work in Rome started as an invitation from Pope Benedict XV back in 1920 to help in the aftermath of World War I. The largest Catholic fraternal service organization continues to support the Vatican through funding television and radio projects, and recently through a series of art restorations. Carl Anderson, Supreme Knight of the Knights of Columbus, joins us now from Rome. Thank you for joining us today.
No, thank you.
So what has been the biggest impact over the last 100 years in Rome?
Well, for us, we started with sports fields at the request of Pope Benedict XV, and I think being in Rome, but most importantly, being in solidarity with 9 different popes, has been a tremendous encouragement for us to continue with our work of charity. So we've developed more programs in Rome, but I think even more importantly, it's helped us be better Knights of Columbus in the United States and Mexico and Canada and the Philippines.
I know you met with Pope Francis yesterday. What was your takeaway from his message?
It's always a great privilege to be in the presence of the Holy Father, and especially with Pope Francis, you can feel his genuine concern and warmth for works of charity to help the poor, the marginalized, people who are suffering. And so we talked about the programs of the Knights of Columbus in charity, in unity, defending the right to life and the sanctity of life, helping Christian refugees in the Middle East, and what he called the Knights of Columbus testimony and witness against a globalization of indifference. And so, wonderful, inspirational meeting with our Holy Father.
And how do the Knights continue to support the Pope as well as the Vatican?
Well, I would say we really have had 3 general areas of support, and it all comes under the category of the Second Vatican Council, Lumen Gentium, that talked about the laity working to transform society by transmitting the values of the gospel. So first, we have been working with the Vatican Communications Office for many, many decades to bring the message of the Holy Father through radio, television, internet, in activities such as World Youth Day, a World Meeting of Families with the Pope, his Christmas Mass, Good Friday and Holy Week services, Easter services. So communicating his message globally. Then the second thing we've been doing is working with various agencies and dicasteries at the Vatican in terms of the work of evangelization. So the Pontifical Commission for Latin America, the Pontifical Council for the Family and the Laity and Social Communications had long working partnerships with many of these dicasteries to further the work of evangelization. And then finally, we've been working with what they call the Fabbrica di San Pietro, which is the office at St. Peter's in the Vatican that protects the great artistic and spiritual patrimony of the Holy See. So we've helped repair the facade of St. Peter's. We've helped restore priceless works of art. We've helped restore the Maderno atrium. And that's a continuing work that we're very proud of, because this is not only, as I say, a patrimony of humanity, but it is a way of focusing and uplifting the spiritual values and spiritual dignity of people. So 3 ways of communication: one through great art, one through the work of evangelization itself, and then the other to make available through means of modern communication the ability of the Holy Father to reach billions of people around the world.
I know under your leadership, the Knights of Columbus has donated more than 700 million hours of service to charity and over $1.5 billion to charity. What new projects are you working on this year?
Well, we continue our work with the Christians at risk in the Middle East. We're helping to build new buildings at the Catholic University of Erbil in Iraq. We're continuing our work for our second responders program. So when there's disasters strike, either in the United States with hurricanes or earthquakes, or in the Philippines with typhoons or floods in Mexico, we're there with help for the people affected. We're also very strong this year on pro-life. And we've had some tremendous polling over the past decade, which shows a majority of the American people unhappy with the kind of unrestricted abortion regime that we have in the United States. They want it to change. We're going to continue to work to see that we enhance the ability of the law to protect the right to life of the unborn. So those are 3 great areas. Also, we're going to be working to just strengthen the local councils, strengthen the fraternal life of our Knights, strengthen and try to evangelize to a greater degree our Catholic families, and especially our Catholic youth, to help Catholic parents transmit the faith to their children and the next generation of Catholics. So I'd say broadly that's what our focus is going to be in the upcoming year.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for all that you're doing. Carl Anderson, Supreme Knight of the Knights of Columbus. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Coming up, new developments in the case of the abortion doctor who kept the remains of unborn babies. The World Health Organization announced today that it has officially given the coronavirus a name, COVID-19. COVID comes from coronavirus. The D stands for disease, and the number 19 stands for 2019, the year in which the coronavirus was first identified. COVID-19 has killed more than 1,000 people in China and sickened more than 43,000 people worldwide. More than 2,400 baby remains found last year in the home of an Indiana abortion doctor are set to be buried. Indiana Attorney General Curtis Hill says a graveside service will be held tomorrow in South Bend. The baby remains resulted from abortions performed by Dr. Ulrich Klopfer. They were found in his garage after his death last September. Joining us now via Skype is Sue Swayze-Liebel. She is the State Policy Director for Pro-Life Group. Susan B. Anthony. Sue, thank you so much for being back on the show. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
So, Sue, tell us, how did tomorrow's burial come about, and did Catholic and Christian leaders play a role in it?
Well, actually, tomorrow's burial service here in Indiana, I'm in Indiana, is the result of the Attorney General of the state of Indiana, Curtis Hill, and the South Bend prosecutor and law enforcement there. Attorney General Hill has done all he can do in the investigation and trying to identify remains and the paperwork and whatnot. And that is over now, and it is time to bury them with dignity. And that is, tomorrow's event is designed by our Attorney General, Curtis Hill.
So explain to us why it's so important to bury the baby remains.
Well, I think most people, whatever side they're on this issue, to think that little boys and girls are discarded with medical waste or put in landfills or other ways of disposing of them when they're really human remains. And we take such great care and respect of the dead in our society, except for these little ones. And that's why Indiana actually passed the bill to say that only these remains can be buried or cremated, a dignified end to their little lives.
Have abortion supporters weighed in on this case and on tomorrow's burial?
I'm not aware of the burial, but they're weighing in. They certainly have weighed in all through the last 3 or 4 years in Indiana as the battle for the Indiana legislature to pass the bill, and then subsequently the Supreme Court decision that these human remains could be buried and cremated. That is something that pro-abortion forces did not want to see.
Sue, do you think tomorrow's burial will have a bigger meaning for the pro-life movement?
Absolutely, I do. While it is a very somber occasion, it almost feels like there's finally some dignity that's brought to the situation of abortion, brought to this terrible scourge on our society, and the women who were involved, who did reach out to the Attorney General during this investigation, thinking that it may be their babies. They have closure as well.
Sue, do you think that more states may enact a similar law?
Yes, in fact, I've been contacted and the Susan B. Anthony list and our Charlotte Lozier Institute on several occasions. Most state legislative sessions are almost halfway through this year, but Utah, the state of Utah, just passed it through the Senate. The state of Kentucky is deliberating it right now, and several others. Now that the United States Supreme Court has given that the green light, states are wanting to follow suit and bring dignity to the lives of these lost little ones.
Well, Sue, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Sue Swayze-Liebel, State Policy Director for Susan B. Anthony List. Again, thank you for your insight.
Thank you.
Up next, Pope Francis releases a message for World Day of the Sick. And Cardinal Timothy Dolan visits Havana. The owner of the New Orleans Saints says the pro football team did not play a role in determining which area priest will be named as credibly accused of abuse. Saints executives helped the Archdiocese of New Orleans in public relations damage control amid the misconduct scandal. Team owner Gail Benson is a practicing Catholic. Pope Francis asked healthcare workers to be like Christ when they deal with patients. In his message for the 28th World Day of the Sick today, the Holy Father says, quote, "What is needed is a personalized approach to the sick, not just of curing, but also of caring in view of an integral human healing." World Day of the Sick coincides with the Feast of Our Lady of Lourdes. And finally tonight, Cardinal Timothy Dolan is on a 6-day mission trip to Cuba. He says his goal is a simple one.
I hope it emphasizes that we're neighbors. And you know, maybe governments have tensions, but people love one another. I see the Cuban people love the American people. I know the American people consider the Cuban people to be neighbors, and they hope for bridges instead of walls.
New York's Cardinal Dolan celebrated Mass at Havana's cathedral yesterday, along with church leaders from the communist country. He made the trip after consulting with the U.S. State Department and the Vatican. The visit includes meeting with Cuba's president. Cardinal Dolan says that he is hoping for better relations between the United States and Cuba. We thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. We're back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.